trying to explain why Donald Trump was so obsessed with tariffs. And yes, he cared about these trade deficits and I think misunderstood them, but I'm going to set that aside. The real benefit that he enjoyed in the first term with tariffs that he learned about, and this is how I always say Trump is very much is a rote learner, and you can't fool him twice. And so what the tariffs allow him to do is encourage people to have to come to him for exemptions. And that the exemption process is how we can end up in a kleptocracy, where he has full control of different aspects of the economy, because he can decide winners and losers. He can decide you get a tariff, you don't get a tariff. You get this, you don't get this. And that this is what was so dangerous about his tariff policy, because it wasn't about the tariffs themselves. It was about that he was going to have singular control of the economy. But what you just described, I'm actually questioning whether that's that maybe we have enough checks and balances that he can create an administration that's a kleptocracy, but he can't really change the system into that per se. Am I being naive?
I think a little bit. I mean, our founding fathers did an amazing job on taking government and setting up in ways with checks and balances.
It's more remarkable all the time with the stuff they thought of. When I think about the emoluments clause, I think about the only thing I can't figure out is why the heck they thought presidents should have pardon power. Like, what was the point of getting away from the king? But anyway, I could set that one little thing aside. The idea that presidents couldn't be put on trial very easily, and that you might actually have to do it in a different way. It is remarkable to me how they understood what the public would be able to take and what they couldn't.
And they were, in many ways, some scholars make the argument that a lot of what went into the Constitution is actually anti-corruption methods and institutions as they understood them at the time. Things like the emoluments clause. They had seen kings bribed with, chests of gold. They didn't. That's why they put it in there. It was in the Articles of Confederation. There's not even really debate in putting it in the Constitution. It's just like, well, duh.
It was a given. Yeah, of course we're doing that. Right.
Well, you have to live in your district, so you can't just, have these rotten boroughs where, somebody's patron or whatever, just, you declare them your MP in Parliament. So a lot of the Constitution is actually corruption as they know it. But it, of course, assumes famously, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. In many ways, it's set up to use one person's greed against the other. It's one of the things I've always loved most about our founding fathers. As someone who reads a lot of political theory, Marxism and a lot of the Islamism under Said Qutb and others assume that you can make a perfect society. And our founding fathers took people as they were. And so, it's this idea that Congress should be a check on the president, actually supposed to be the most important power, which you've brought up before in other episodes. And the role of the Supreme Court evolves over time. Right. But right now there's big concerns because, of course, Congress isn't acting as a check. Indeed, Trump is not, unlike in his first term. Trump is not putting
right now. The leadership of Congress has been captured right now.
I mean, they approved Pete Hegseth. I mean, come on.
They approved Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Yeah. I mean, who in a million years would have thought that these people are qualified to be in government? We have a Supreme Court that basically gave a tremendous amount of impunity to Trump himself. In the United States versus Trump, which is extremely concerning, and a Supreme Court that, especially since 2010, has really shrunk what the definition of corruption even is.
They seem to be really afraid of the voters. For a group of people that don't have to face the voters, the Supreme Court, I think Robert's motives are pure is the wrong word to use here, are noble, even if he's producing outcomes that I understand what he's trying to avoid. And I think what we all know is that these are lessons you can't put off these lessons. And the longer you put it off, the worse it's going to get. But I understand what he thinks he's trying to avoid. How's that? But they look way too captured. They look way too afraid of the people on this one, and of a small group of people.
Well, and the concerns about, $500,000 Winnebagos and so forth aren't exactly helping their credibility with the people. And the fact
not at all. Yeah.
That's a big part of what you deal with in any sort of society, but particularly if society really is becoming much more kleptocratic, is the sort of every day it's another, how is this okay? That degradation of society, its values, its norms, as its institutions are allowed to degrade themselves. The society at large in many ways degrades itself.
So, it's one of those, this feels like one of those things, like trying to figure out when a recession begins. Well, we sort of know after we leave it, right? Like it's always easier to find out when a recession started after we're done with the recession than when we're in the middle of it. Is that how you would describe trying to, how do you know when we're in a kleptocracy? Perhaps we're already in it. We don't feel it, right? We're the boiled frog and we just don't fully realize it yet. Or are there more signs we should be looking for?
Different scholars some will argue that we're already at least in an oligarchy. And this came up quite a bit since 2008. And you actually brought up in one of your other shows, the fact that nobody went to jail for gross malfeasance that led to 2008. That at least if not a kleptocracy, these increasing concerns about the United States already being an oligarchy. Ruled by the few, where those few, it's an Aristotelian term, literally from 350 BC, that these are individuals that are in charge for their benefit, not for the benefit of society overall.
And you know what they would argue at the time, because this was the argument at the time, right? The economy's too big to fail. And even though we have these horrible bad actors, we don't have time to decide who was nefarious and who was accidental. We have to bail out the economy so that it doesn't destroy the rest of the global order, right? Like it felt as if it was like people exempted these people from punishment because you don't understand we're in the middle of we don't have time to arrest people in the middle of a hurricane.
Mm-hmm. And I understand the argument, and at the time it actually makes a lot of sense, and many of those who were in charge had been students of the Great Depression. But after the fact, they still didn't go to jail. Right. And it wasn't just that. We've seen the role that money is playing increasingly in politics, how different, we focus a lot on the Supreme Court and Citizens United, but a lot of campaign finance laws and rules have actually been degraded under the courts, and particularly the Supreme Court over the years, to a shell of what they were in the past. The amount of what constituted corruption has shrunk, the ability of politicians to accept money. One of the interesting things about the definition of a conflict of interest overall is we know it degrades a democracy, but conflict of interest doesn't actually have to be illegal, unlike bribery or something where there's illegality. The concept is if a rational person could have questions about that civil servant or that politician and where their interest lies, that's where the conflict of interest is.
Right. Doesn't make it a crime, doesn't make it illegal, but it makes it unethical.
It makes it highly unethical, but it also just degrades your overall democracy and your overall governing system. And that's the kind of things that we see with, the Supreme Court and the expensive fishing trips and the expensive Winnebagos. Clearly, I need better friends because I'm not getting free Winnebagos. The ability for large amounts of money to be bundled and so forth and given to politicians, the weakening of the rules of what they can use for personal use versus non-personal use, and the role of private loans, even book sales, stuff like that. So irrational.
It used to be worse though, Jodi. I have to tell you, like I always love to tell this story to my students when I'm teaching about like as bad as it seems now, it used to be worse. So did you know that in 1992, that was my first year covering campaign politics. And that year we had this astronomical amount of members of Congress decided to not seek re-election. And there was a variety of reasons for that. Number one, you had a check bouncing scandal where they got to write checks without any money to cover it, and the government just covered it. That was a weird, and even when you go back to this day, you're like, I can't believe members of Congress just had this sort of a checkbook without money in it, and it always cashed. You're less like, that's crazy. There was also a reapportionment year, and so people don't like to run in new lines. But there was one other thing. They had just changed the law. Prior to 1992, a member of Congress could retire and keep their campaign money as their own, personal, just like an IRA. Like, here you go. I mean, after 1992, in theory, members of Congress are not allowed to personally pocket campaign money once they're done running for office. But prior to 1992, members of Congress could do that.